50 years ago, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs over Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of people and changing the course of history. It forced an end to World War II, but in the years since, historians have begun to question the motives behind America's dramatic and deadly entry into the nuclear era. Last night in Part 1 of Ground Zero, Terence McKenna traced the events leading up to the first ever use of an atomic weapon. Tonight, the military case and the moral debate. We'll hear from the bomber pilots and from those who survived the devastation. Here now is Terence McKenna with Part 2 of his documentary, Ground Zero.
By August 1945, the island of Tinian in the South Pacific had been transformed into what was called a sandstone aircraft carrier. It was almost 4 years since the Japanese surprise attack at Pearl Harbor had drawn the United States into the Second World War, and now the Pacific War was drawing to a close. The U.S. Air Force had achieved complete air superiority and was bombing Japan at will. Every day, hundreds of B-29 bombers would go out to attack the cities of Japan. On returning, some would have to make emergency landings. Crashes were a daily event. In one corner of the Tinian airfield, there was a special squadron, the 509th, preparing for a secret mission. One of their bombers would carry the destructive power of 2,000 other B-29s. It would carry the atomic bomb. On August 5th, 1945, the night before their first mission, a mission they knew would destroy an entire city, the members of the 509th were restless.
We all went to bed to get a nap, but there was no sleeping. I couldn't sleep. You know, we tossing around in bed and all that sort of thing, so finally decided it'd be better to play poker.
Paul Tibbets, commander of the 509th, would fly the strike plane, named for his mother, Enola Gay. Charles Sweeney would fly beside him in another bomber.
The mood was high key, perhaps something like before a football game or a baseball game or something, among the players.
After getting photographed, we went right out and just got in the airplane, and after waving goodbye to everybody, they got out of the way, cranked up the engine, got on the runway, and went.
The mission bombers took off on schedule at 2:45 a.m. It would require 5.5 hours to reach the target, Hiroshima, Japan.
We had studied this city for hours on end. We knew it better than I knew my hometown or anybody knew his hometown. We just knew it. We made a turn from what we call the initial point into the city, and we could see the city just lying there as it looked in the pictures.
It was a beautiful military target. We picked it as close to the geographical center of the population area as we could, and there was a temple right by the bridge. So the temple plus the bridge and the water gave us a good aiming point.
It was a T bridge, that is to say, in the form of a T itself, the bridge itself. And I saw the bomb leave his airplane. I did say to myself, gee, there it goes, and it's a live one. It's the first live one I've ever seen. And there aren't any strings on it, and we can't pull it back. It's for better or for worse, it's gone. And then we went into our turns.
The bomb would take 43 seconds to reach explosion altitude. Hiroshima was a city of 350,000 people. It was identified as a target because it was the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army, but only a tiny proportion of the population was in the military. Most of the residents that morning were women and children. At 8:15 a.m., the schoolyards were just filling up. The bomb passed just over the aiming point, the T Bridge in the city center, and exploded just behind the Industrial Promotion Hall. The hall was one of the few buildings in the city, that stayed standing. "50 years after the dropping of the atomic bomb here on Hiroshima, the event still stirs gut-wrenching emotions, both among those who denounce it as an act of barbarism and among those who believe it justified. The controversy is rekindled by each new historical exhibit, film, or book about the topic. It seems as if both sides worry that each new version may be the one that's accepted as the final judgment of history, as definitive. When it comes to forming a judgment about the dropping of the atomic bomb, the central factor has to be the effect it had here in Japan, at ground zero. Many who stood on the ground in Hiroshima that day remember looking up to watch the Enola Gay passing over the city, wondering if it would drop something. 50 years ago, Masanori Yamane was a young boy who was fascinated with planes. Visiting the Hiroshima Peace Museum today, he remembers that he could instantly recognize the B-29.
The moment the B-29 released the bomb, it changed its course by 90 degrees and started heading north. We were still pointing and following the plane with our eyes. That's when I experienced the flash and the explosion.
Mamoru Takahashi was 14 years old at the time. His experiences that morning are illustrated with a series of drawings.
Just when the class monitor told us to stand in a line, there was a big blast, and we were in total darkness. We could not see anything. After the black smoke was gone, we realized that we were being blown away.
This is the actual film of the Hiroshima explosion, taken from the chase plane at 30,000 feet.
When the bomb exploded, the airplane was hit by 3 shock waves.
There was nothing of the city that we could see except smoke. And then from the center of that came that burbling cloud, boiling, roiling cloud coming up and rising in every color of the rainbow, purples and greens and reds and oranges and yellows.
These are the only actual pictures of the Hiroshima blast taken from ground level. The temperature at the middle of the explosion reached 5,000 degrees. The blast leveled almost everything over an area of 13 square kilometers. Shinbok-Soo crawled out from under the wreckage of her house, looking for her children.
Finally, after 10 or 15 minutes, the black smoke started to disperse, and I looked around. Every house was gone. There was absolutely nothing anywhere. I had no idea what had happened. I heard my grandmother crying out. She was trapped under some wreckage with my baby still on her back. 2 of my younger children were dead. My 16-year-old was alive, but he was pinned down under a big timber, lying face down, and the timber was resting right on top of the back of his head.
These are the first photographs taken in Hiroshima in the aftermath of the explosion. Wounded people are gathering 3 hours after the blast, seeking medical attention. They are lining up, but there is nothing to offer them. In the Hiroshima Peace Museum, visitors are given an impression of the physical condition of the thousands of burn victims on that day. Most had skin peeling off them in large sheets. Their pain was excruciating. Mr. Takahashi's hands were burned that way, and his ears were virtually melted away by the bomb flash. He tried to find relief in a nearby river.
There we dunked our burned bodies in the river. It was such a relief to feel the cold water on my burning skin. The river was full of dead bodies. It was a living death.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. That was because we wished in this first attack to avoid, insofar as possible, the killing of civilians. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war.
At the moment President Truman spoke of his concern for civilians, doctors in makeshift hospitals in Hiroshima were desperately trying to cope with the injured, very few of whom were soldiers. All they had was a little iodine to treat people who suffered terrible flash burns all over their bodies. Soon the iodine ran out, and there was only vegetable oil. There was no anesthetic to dull the pain.